All right, guys, welcome to Happy Hour Holidays, your go-to podcast for business, entrepreneurship, and life stories. If you want to make a dream fulfill, you got to get off your fucking couch, quit being lazy, and get up and make something happen. That's what we're here. We're here to push you from being a fucking lazy bum. Today in studio, we got your host every single week, Manny Fresh. We got the resume, Sean Fabre. We got Steve Hollingshead, fucking repeat offender. And then we got Dom in the house. So today we're going to be talking a little bit, which, you know, I love when Steve comes on because I know it's going to be something with history, and I fucking love history. And it's going to be about Civil War medicine. So let's start off the topic here, Steve. Like, where do you want to start at?
Well, usually everyone asks me, how do I get into this?
Yeah.
All right. I'm a filmmaker.
Yeah.
And we talked about my last film, Ybor City Underworld. It's on Amazon Prime about the mafia in Ybor City. Little self-promotion there.
Hey.
I'm a whore. I'll take it.
Well, at least you'll do with Sean this. I got a book. I'm a civil engineer. I do this. I do that. That's how we call the resume.
I do have 2 books, too.
I co-starred in the movie.
What's that?
I co-starred in the movie.
He was a gangster.
I got killed.
A gangster?
Yeah, he got killed. We blew his ass away, man. Immediately. It's funny. Watch the film.
So you got acting credits now.
Yeah, he got
Yes,
credits,
I do.
too.
Yeah, you're going to need an IMDb page.
Yeah.
Oh, hell yeah.
So anyhow, back in like the 1990s, there was a TV show that came out on this new channel called the History Channel. And it was called Civil War Journal. And it pretty much just romanticized the war. And I like to touch on things that people don't normally touch on. And I thought, you know what? There's nothing romantic about being in a war. It's horrible. Anything about that. Any veteran who's been in combat will tell you there's nothing romantic or fun about war. And so I thought, Civil War medicine is something no one really does. And I did a lot of research on the topic. And I found an organization called the Society of Civil War Surgeons. And they turned around and invited me to come in and shoot some interviews with them when I gave them the idea of what I was going to do after I did a lot of research. And so that way you know what you're talking about when you go over and approach these people. This whole video I did was called Between the Bullet and the Battlefield, The Truth and Myths of Civil War Medicine. And as Dom told me that it's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube, and I had no idea it was on YouTube because somebody put it on there as an educational piece. Okay, fine. This is a 1990s thing. I mean, the quality of it's not that good. I'm thinking about reviving it and doing it again with more cleaner illustration. But that's something for thought for the future. So I did this video. It was quite successful, and it led to me doing all the audio-visual elements of the new National Museum of Civil War Medicine in Frederick, Maryland. And I got invited to do that, and I did all the AVs for it, all the sound effects for all the emergent exhibits and all that, and actually got a few artifacts to actually include into the museum itself. So that's what happened, and as a result, I accomplished my goal of actually showing how unpretty, war is. And being a veteran myself, I understand these things.
Well, especially the Civil War, right?
Well, this is a Civil War, yeah. Yeah, but any war itself.
You have cannons just ripping through people.
So, Steve, when the Civil War started, how many surgeons were actually available, and how many were actually needed?
Well, actually, during the Civil War, there were 600,000 dead and 400,000 injuries, and most of them were due to illness. Okay. The thing about it was that
a lot of gangrene.
No,
it was
that
mostly
was
typhoid, dysentery. It was diarrhea, basically.
Oh shit!
Yeah. Diarrhea. Basically, dysentery was the biggest killer. Dysentery. There were 45,000 casualties of dysentery alone in both armies. That was the big one, and that was because of poor sanitation. They had poor sleeping arrangements on the ground all the time. You had bad food and all that other kind of stuff. And we're going to get into the disease portion of it later on. And I'm going to show you some things that are just going to make your skin crawl. For anybody that's faint of heart, this is not one you want to watch because I have some very nasty illustration to show you. Of course, Sean eats it up. Of course, he's
I don't want to see that.
He's sick that way, I know Don does. Excuse me. So with that, at the very beginning, you only had like 97,000 surgeons to the entire Union Army, and then later on, what happened was when the war started, that Lincoln had a call for 100,000 people coming. Well, it turned out that now the people in the all these local towns started raising regiments. And by raising regiments, it became a competition between towns. So once you get these soldiers that are volunteering, and some of them did
Are
it
you
for
talking about both the North and the South, or are you just talking about the North?
North and South both.
North and South, okay.
Okay. So what happened was that you had people raising regiments, and most of them were hometown doctors, and a lot of them never seen an amputation kit until they went into the Army. And a lot of these people who were officers and who were doctors were by political appointment as well. Just like anything else in the Union Army, you got money, you're going to be, we'll make it colonel or general, that type of thing.
Were some of them that were appointed not qualified to be doctors or surgeons?
Absolutely. And what happened was that during that time, a lot of people decided they're going to go and they're going to become doctors, and diploma mills started raking out all these medical diplomas. And a lot of people say, okay, I'm a doctor, MD, me doctor, And so with all that, then there became so many people who had pre-existing conditions that the Army had to come in and turn around and reinspect these things and then start thinning the troops out to the people who were really qualified. Now, what's the qualifications? First of all, you have to have all your fingers because you have to be able to load the weapon. You had to have 2 plausible teeth because you had to tear off the paper cartridge, put it inside the weapon, and then ram it down. So and you got to walk from point A to point B. Now, most of the time when these people transported, they walked from point A to point B. You can walk up to 12 miles a day, and you're wearing a very hot wool uniform. That's all you had. Well, you had a wool uniform. There wasn't really a lot of underwear because they would take the underwear and use them for patches to clean their weapons.
There's a lot of
That type of
chafing
stuff.
then, man.
And you got-
I can
well,
imagine. I'd be chafing my balls and my
They
my
were
thighs,
dirty as
man.
hell. And
Oh
a lot
my
of time
God.
it didn't fit well. Let me change uniforms with you. You fit better than mine, that type of thing.
You're talking about the soldiers.
Soldiers, yeah. And the surgeons too. Obviously, that was basically the uniform of the day. So what happened is you got shot and a bullet comes in and hits your uniform and goes through you. You're taking that infected, dirty, nasty piece of cloth in and sticking it inside you too. So that, am I grossing you out already, Manny? Come on, man.
And back then, they didn't know what germs were. If you told a doctor, like, your hands are dirty, you can't, you need to, wash your hands. There were some doctors in the 1840s that would say, like, in the birthing units, you need to wash your hands. These doctors would be like, what are you talking about? That's absurd. Yeah. And turns out that's mortality rates dropped once they started cleaning their hands. So they didn't know what germs were back then, which is, we think about that now.
And they were probably also swapping blood.
Oh, yeah.
Now that if you work on one, you don't clean your hands, you work on the next one.
Wow.
And then whatever the last patient had, now the new patient has.
Yeah,
You're right.
They didn't care about
and
that.
the thing of it is, they also had a theory of laudable pus. They think that if you have a wound and it's showing pus, it's healthy pus. Wrong. Again, it wasn't until 1870, 5 years after the Civil War, 1870, that Lister and Pasteur introduced the germ theory, and they basically laughed Pasteur out of the theater, because it's like, no, this is bullshit. And it turned around that it took about 15 years for them to actually get on and saying, yeah, he's right. There's something to this. So now that they understand that, but back then they didn't understand germ theory. They had one microscope in the entire Union Army, and they looked in the microscope. They didn't know what the hell they're looking at, So that was a big thing. It killed a lot of people. So out of all the people, the 600,000 people who were dead in the Civil War, 2/3 of them died for basic disease, childhood disease.
So you could have saved probably 2/3 of them if they knew anything about.
Right. So basically, you have a kid who's living on a farm. He has not had a lot of intercommunication with a lot of other people, and you turn around and you have no immunity system. Then all of a sudden, these people get thrown into a camp. You've got 100,000 people in one camp, and they're spreading. One gets the chicken pox, they get the mumps, they get
rubella,
all this kind
diphtheria.
of stuff. Diphtheria,
all
all
stuff
these
you
things.
get when you don't have exposure. You have terrible nutrition. You're drinking shit. These people didn't know they drank.
weren't boiling
They would shit
water.
in the water.
No.
They would drink.
Basically what happened was that the way the camps were set up, you were sleeping on the cold
It's actually
floor.
a miracle anybody survived.
Even like
Really?
the big cities, when we got urbanized, it was the same thing. And that, like, when horses went away, that was another big thing. When horses went away, a lot of those diseases just started to completely drop. The incidence rates were
And then when we got sanitation sewer systems because people were just throwing shit out the window.
Like the Romans knew about sewer systems.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyhow, in the camps, you had, like Dom just brought up, you had throwing food in the back of the tent. Animals come and eat that, you're spreading disease, right? The food was terrible. You didn't have a lot of battles during nighttime because they didn't have any vitamin E, and they couldn't see at night. They had nighttime blindness. And if you turn around, and the biggest part of it is that you had a river nearby, and they would defecate and urinate in the river at the same port where they got their water. And, that was causing a lot of dysentery, and it killed a lot of people. So what happened was Surgeon General Hammond came in and started having the camps inspected. And he said, look, you make your sewer system downstream from where you're gathering the water. If it's stagnant water, you boil the water, that type of thing. And so that was basically what cleaned up the death rate a little bit in the camps.
Is it safe to say that the common folk back then had a lower IQ?
I wouldn't say a lower IQ. If you read some of the letters and things that these people wrote, they were intelligent. But again, they just didn't know. They just didn't know. You got a lot of very, very poetic.
Steve, would you ever take a shit upstream from where you're drinking water?
I drink city water now. What are you talking about? My point made, right? We were talking about a water filtration system that I have in my house. Yeah, right. So anyhow, then you got the medicines, and the medicines were the really, really nasty portion of it. With the medical pannier that a lot of these surgeons had, the local doctors for the regiment came in, and they would use mostly homebrewed stuff that they had, In the South, they didn't have access to the medicines that we had in the North because you've got the agricultural South versus the industrial North and all that. So the way that the South got most of their medicines was, number one, blockade running. Remember, a lot of the weapons that they got came from England, like the Enfield rifle, that type of stuff. So if they ran a blockade, they got their medicine. The second portion was that they would steal it from the Union. If you turn around and you had a battle, and remember, up until Gettysburg in '63, they were winning the war. So if you have a lot of wagon trains that have their medical supplies in it, you steal their medical supplies, and you have that for your army now. And the third portion was that they would use a lot of medicines like the Native Americans used, where the barks of certain trees would cause kind of like aspirin and stuff, and they still do that today.
Yeah, white willow bark is
exactly
where aspirin comes from. I take white willow bark. It'll kill a headache.
Really? That explains a lot about you, Don.
Yeah.
I'm sure you buy a supplement though, right?
Yeah, it's a supplement. Yeah. Like if I get a headache or a backache, I'll take it.
So it's like anti-inflammatory.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, that's where they synthesized aspirin from.
So it's white willow bark.
White willow bark. Yeah.
White willow bark. Yeah.
I'm gonna tell my buddy because he's got a terrible back. He's always complaining. Yeah, Brian. I was gonna tell him.
So now we're getting into some of the medicines that they had, and a lot of the medicines they had mercury. And I'm going to show you an example. They had a thing called blue pill. All right, and blue pill was basically elemental mercury rolled up with chalk, which gave it a blue color.
And now it's Viagra.
Right?
No way. No.
I was going to say it has to be either from the Matrix or it's Viagra.
I'm going to throw that one away right now. Another one was calomel, and calomel was widely used also.
They still use that, right?
No, this is mercury.
Oh.
Mercury. You've heard the term mad as a hatter?
Yeah.
That came from whenever they made the, oops, there we go. Sorry. That's, I'm going to throw it at Dom. Basically, Mad Hatter is whenever they made the felt hats, and they bonded the felt onto the cardboard with mercury. And as a result of that, they're turning around and they're ingesting it through the pores and inhaling it, and it made them nuts. And there's a lot of accounts that I've read where soldiers come home after the war and they're acting real crazy, this and that, and some of them committed suicide as a result of that. So calomel was very bad, and here's an example of a soldier who actually had half his face eaten away, if I can get this.
From just the calomel?
Just the calomel.
Oh, crap.
That is a result of calomel poisoning, okay? And it eats away your flesh, your skin, all that, and the fact that the mercury also make you nuts, right?
Can you imagine if that would happen to soldiers now? Like if they came home like that,
Well, some of them did. I'm going to show you something that's even worse. I'm going to show you something that's even worse.
Oh, God. I don't know, bro. You're getting into this shit.
Okay. Now, this one is one I found at a flea market when I lived in Pennsylvania. Okay, that is blood arsenic, strychnine, and corrosive compounds. And what they did was they used this as a purgative. And the theory back then
What's a
was
purgative?
that anything you can do to purge the system of ill humors. When you got sick, they called it ill humors. So anyway, you can defecate it, you can regurgitate it, you can urinate it. You're getting it out of, you got it? Yeah, you get it out of the system. You're purging the system of ill humors. So they use these type of poisons for that. And they would call it purgatives. And then later on, they had a thing called patent medicines, like this one's called Hochstetter's Bitters. That's a real bottle I found at a flea market one year. That used to be my hobby. And Hochstetter Bitters is a patent medicine, and what it was very bitter. And the two miracle drugs back in the days were quinine and bromine. You take bromine, you put it on a wound, and basically it actually helped clean the wound. It burnt like hell too.
Yeah.
And then with Hochstetter's Bitters, quinine was used for malaria, And what they would do is they turn around and they would put malaria into the drinking waters and stuff like that. And they turn around that a lot of people aren't getting malaria as much. Now, quinine water is what they use in gin and tonic, right?
Yeah, and we know quinine now, the pharmaceutical version is basically hydroxychloroquine, which everybody knows from COVID. They vilify Trump for that, but it's basically the same thing.
So with the bromine or the quinine, it's gin and tonic. A lot of Englishmen like to drink G&T. So have you ever seen a drunken Englishman with malaria? So
I guess not.
So the other things we have to worry about, and I didn't touch on before, also was the fact that whenever you have a lot of soldiers protecting the nation's capital, like Washington D.C. during the war, or Richmond.
I thought it wasn't Washington D.C. at the time of the Civil War.
Yeah, it was.
Oh,
Yeah. During the time of Civil War, it was Washington. Remember, Lincoln built the Capitol,
that was
and
Philadelphia.
New Dome, and all
for
that.
whatever reason.
No, that was during the Revolution.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyhow, what happened was that you had a lot of soldiers that were there, but you also had a lot of brothels, and
Syphilis.
They called them baldy houses back then. All right. So most of the baldy houses stood where the IRS is now. And so basically the thought is they're going to do the same thing to us now that they did 160 years ago, screwing us, right? Took them a while to catch on to that. Sean heard that joke last night. Anyhow, what happened was because they're actually spreading syphilis, gonorrhea, chlamydia, and all these other nasty.
Gonorrhea
too.
Gonorrhea,
yeah. And so what happened was that the surgeons came in and they started licensing and inspecting the prostitutes, and because it was legal back in that time, so they would give them a license. So if you passed the inspection and at a certain time intervals, they would turn around and allow you to practice your trade.
Just as like Costa Rica, pretty much. They got licenses.
And just about any Latin American country, And so
at least that's what we've read.
Yeah, that's what I read.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. And I watch porn for the acting.
That's something you might actually do, Steve.
Yeah.
No, you never know.
He needs a VPN for it now.
Well, I have a filmmaking company, and I call it, and my motto is the customer always comes first. So anyhow, so they actually cleaned it up, the brothels, and that made a lot of difference. And also one of the patent medicines they used was a thing called laudanum, and these are actual laudanum bottles also. And laudanum was tincture of opium, 80% alcohol, 20% opium. And it was there to cure just about anything that was ailing you, whether headaches, menstrual cramps, whatever.
Why would anybody take some of that shit when there's a skull and crossbones on it?
That was a label they added later.
That's after the Hayes Act.
It's kind of like the Surgeon General warning that, they were a lot less politically correct back then. So they just put a fucking skull and crossbones on it.
No, literally on the label it says poison.
It does. Just like it did with the blood arsenic, strychnine, and all that other kind of stuff too.
Like laudanum, now you think if you go to an emergency room and you need pain medicine, it's called Dilaudid. It's a derivative of opium.
It's crazy that people have those bottles, though. It's
the funny part of it is, I'm going to tell you how I got those.
That's 150 years.
Because I watch the Antique Roadshow just for the shits and giggles. I'm always watching that shit. I'm like, dude, some of the shit that people have is just
why'd they say this? But it's kind of cool in a weird way.
Well, how I came across these was when I lived in Altoona, Pennsylvania, which I call the second most lifeless planet next to Jupiter. That was an old railroad town. Okay, and I, like I said, go flea marketing. That was my weekend hobby. And I saw this guy had all these laudanum bottles. And I'm looking, I said, where'd you get these? And he goes, I was putting a new roof on somebody's house, and I found these, and the guy said I could have them.
How's the
You know.
fucking roof?
Well, we tore the whole roof off. It was an old turn of the century railroad town. This thing's rotted by then. He said, I found all these things, and so I bought a whole bunch of them, and I took them to Gettysburg and sold them to relic shops. People ate it up real fast.
Oh yeah, no.
Oh, yeah.
Because I
Yeah.
watch Pawn Stars too, and whenever it comes to Civil War stuff, they fucking pay top dollar for that kind of stuff.
Well, it's not as popular now. Like I said, whenever Ken Burns' documentary came out on the Civil War, and also the Civil War Journal type thing came out, that it was very popular, and the price of relics went sky high.
Is the
And
Civil
then-
War Journal the one with Danny Glover?
No. Later on, I think it was.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
At first, I don't think
That's a
so.
good one.
Yeah. So, anyhow, relics were going sky high. Now, what I would do is I would take, and I lived in Gettysburg for 5 years.
Let's hold that thought real quick, Steve. And when we get back from our break, we'll continue. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe on all our socials. We'll be right back with Steve and Dom right now. Happy Hour Holidays. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you. All right, guys, we're back to Happy Hour Holidays. And I know Steve was in the middle of a story
About antiques.
Relics, yeah.
about the
Relics.
brothel.
Well, no, we were
Oh,
talking
yeah,
about
we already covered that one.
okay.
no personal experiences there.
You want to circle back to the brothel?
Now, I'll tell you what, I used to teach American history at a military academy, and these were, kids. And then one of them looked at me and said, "What side were you on, Mr. Hollingshead?" And I'm going like, "You little shit. You flunked."
You're out of here.
So anyhow, they were talking about all these artifacts that, suddenly became very popular, and everyone would swarm to these different places like Gettysburg, Fredericksburg, whatever the case may be, and buy these relics. And I lived there for 5 years. And what I did is I would take them, and I take these lead bullets. And when you take the bullet and you have it in the ground for a long time, it rusts white, right? So I'd take and I'd sell these little bullets to tourists, and then I'd go in my backyard and bury a couple more fake ones, and sell it to
Oh, wow.
No, I'm kidding. I don't do that.
They didn't do that. He went to Pawn
Not
Stars,
me,
made
no.
Cool
I mean, it's
10,000.
authentic. Hey, it was a Gettysburg found. It was found in Gettysburg. Here it is.
Let me call my expert. He'll be here in a minute.
Yeah. The most I could do is $20.
Yeah.
That's right. I'll sell you a rifle.
Did you find this in Steve's backyard?
I'll sell you a rifle, and then I'll go down the basement and make another one. Yeah. So anyhow, what we're going to get into now is I want to develop into what actually happened during the battle. All right.
Which one?
Any battle.
Oh, okay.
Okay. This is basically the standing operation procedure, literally. And what they would do is if you had a battle going on, the first line of duty would be to set up an aid station. And usually a knock crowd of rocks or something. There's one in Gettysburg that is like 50 yards away from where all the fighting was happening in the wheat field. And you would have a doctor
wheat
there.
field?
Yeah, the wheat field. There was a portion of Gettysburg called the wheat field, and then it goes to the peach orchard.
Was there marijuana there?
He said the wheat.
Oh, wheat. Wheat.
Not weed, not wheat field, not weed field. All right. Eyes closed now. You didn't tell me I do hypnosis. Okay. So anyhow, what happened was that they would treat them as much as they possibly could and wait for the ambulance to come and then send them off to a regimental hospital. When they had little flag markers for the ambulances to come up. Now, the ambulances were not very nasty. They were very, very nasty. They didn't have any springs on them. It's just like a wagon running over a rough road, and you're wounded, you're hurting, and then they finally get to an aid station or they get to a hospital, and the regimental hospitals were set up in barns. They were set up in houses. Basically, in a town like Gettysburg, every single house that was there, every single building was used as a hospital.
What's the population of Gettysburg at this time?
Jesus, I can't remember. Tell you the truth,
Like
you had to throw that.
1,000
at me.
maybe?
Oh no, there's like 2,800 residents. I
Okay.
think about 2,800 residents in Gettysburg. I call it Spaghettisburg because they had the battle there for spaghetti. Everybody wanted spaghetti, and they merged that. Okay,
No.
I'll shut up
That
now.
was a horrible joke.
I know. Yeah. So anyhow,
At least I had to call him out on
eyes
that
closed
shit.
now. So anyhow, what happened was that, and actually that's a good point. I'm glad you brought that up, Don, because that's going to allow me to segue into the aftermath of the battle, because you had all these dead 44,000 bodies, all over the dead.
I'm assuming you just burn them.
Well, what happened was
They had a lot of mass graves.
Yeah, they had a lot of
Yeah.
graves.
Just
What
light it
happened? We
on
had all
fire.
these dead bodies, 44,000 dead bodies all over the battlefield, and it was about 5 square miles, plus all the beasts of burden, and they're rotting in a hot 98-degree sun. And you can imagine the smell
And
and
the
the
disease.
miasma and the effluvia of all that. People actually got sick and had to leave because it was so bad.
Just because of the smell could.
The smell. Imagine,
Well-
imagine going down the road and you smell a dead deer on the side of the road.
It smells like
Magnify
shit.
that 44,000 times.
Yeah.
That's how nasty it was. And you had all these bottle flies coming along, and
Mosquitoes would also tap into the bodies, right, and drain some of the blood that were freshly wounded and dying, and then go and bite somebody else, maybe a couple miles down the road.
I have never read an account of that, but it's a good thought.
Yeah.
You're making me look bad, Sean. Shut up. and so what happened was also the fact that you had hogs running around on the battlefield eating the bodies of the dead. There's a picture of a dead soldier, and I didn't bring it. I didn't want to get too gross. But there's a soldier in Gettysburg laying on the battlefield, and his entrails are all blown away. And it was a fake shot. They have a canteen over here, they had a musket over here, and they had a cannon shell beside it. They said it was a artillery casualty. What they really think happened was that hogs came and ate the entrails of the dead body. And so what happened with all this blood and everything, contaminating the soil, contaminating the water source, you've got another disease factor happening. And luckily, on the night of July 3rd, after Pickett's charge, it rained. And it poured rain, and it kind of washed the ground and the blood away and all that, and it kind of saved the populate and the groundwater a bit as a result of that. So we're going back into what happens during the battle. You get to a regimental hospital, and a lot of these hospitals were basically barns, houses, churches, anything they could find. And what they would do is basically take the door off the barn, and they would take it and put it between two barrels, and that was your table. Now, if you go on the threshing floor of the barn at the top, below that threshing floor, where all the animals were, you have a lot of wounded lying there. And if the doctor performed an operation, and if they took a bucket of water and washed it off, all that water and shit's coming down on top of you, you're basically better off if the surgeon didn't get a hold of you in a lot of cases. Because, again, spreading the disease. All right?
There's really no license, right, for the regiments? I mean, it was.
Well, they had diplomas, the doctors. Some of them were actually real doctors. Some of them were, doctors that came from the hometown. And a lot of these doctors brought these kids into life, by birthing and,
The ones that
they're
made
seeing
it.
them die.
Yeah. And so what they would do is they'd have the wounded, and the wounded were all laying out. And remember, during the Battle of Gettysburg, it was 96 degrees out, and you're wearing a wool uniform. All right. So they would turn around, and they would be all spread out all around the yards, and they would perform triage back then, and and then the ones that say you ain't just gonna make it, they're gonna give here's some opium, and they let them die.
Yeah.
That was it.
Did it have morphine back then?
Yeah, they had
Same
morphine.
thing.
They had
Yeah.
morphine.
Same
Yeah,
thing.
tincture of opium, right? Tincture of opium, laudanum, morphine and alcohol. Now, the myth about that is that they used alcohol as a sedative. That's not true. They did not. Because if you did that, you remember alcohol is a stimulus, and it was also thinned the blood. And if you drank enough alcohol, it's going to put you passed out. You're going to be like Sean was 2 weeks ago.
He's not allowed back in that place.
Not allowed-
allegedly.
he's banned.
He's
know.
banned.
I walked in there. I was just like,
No,
okay,
you
well,
can't go. You can't go.
You're like, get out of here, boy.
So anyhow, what happened was that after they performed the triage and they brought the patient in,
that's where I met Dom, actually.
and they asked us why we drink.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So they would bring the patient in, and someone asked me a couple of weeks ago whether or not they would treat the enemy, and I said, yeah, they would, but I think they basically would turn around and treat their own people first, or if it's a matter of this guy is wounded, really bad that we have a chance to save him, they would probably operate on. I mean, you got to remember, a lot of people had relatives that fought in the war. I mean, Mary Todd Lincoln had a brother and an uncle who fought in the Confederacy. So the guy, could be my cousin from, Mississippi or whatever the case may be.
Well, why would they try to help the enemy? I mean,
They're
Well, it's
people.
called humanitarianism.
Well, it's also, remember the Hippocratic Oath also.
Oh.
They still had that back then.
Did they?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Hippocrates is like thousands of years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, so
exactly.
yeah, they kind of
Yeah.
So it was like
survived.
there was rules to the war where they'd be like, well,
Remember, even during World War I, they considered it a gentleman's type of war,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
Didn't they have ceasefires in like World War One where if they had wasn't there like a wolf problem or something where they had
During Christmas time, there was. Yeah.
they would have ceasefires to like kill
Yeah.
wildlife and
wound,
stuff,
that
and then
type
they
of thing.
pick it
all
back
right,
up
everybody,
again.
time out.
Yeah.
Kill the fucking wolves.
We
Yeah.
gotta eat.
Look, we're working as a team. Why can't we just? Why can't we just
that
end
makes
it?
sense
Yeah.
right there. Yeah.
So let's get
Working as a
into
team, why couldn't you just stop fighting?
let's get into
It's because of those goddamn Southern Democrats, man.
Oh boy, here we go. We're getting into politics.
They
now.
switched parties.
That's right.
All right. So what happened was that if I'm going to turn around, I'm going to assess the wound. Now you've got to remember that most of your wounds came from your arms and your legs, and sometimes the torso.
Now, would they have to amputate those?
That's what we're going to talk about. What happened was why. What? Didn't I do that to you the other night?
You tried to.
I did. Anyhow, what happened was that you had wounds on the arm, sometimes in the head, sometimes on the legs. And the reason was because when you're firing a musket, you're like this. This is the type of exposure your body is doing incoming projectiles that are going to do nasty things to you, okay? And so with the arms, first of all, we're going to look at it. What the first thing we do with any kind of a wound? We probe the wound. This is your primary probe.
What do you mean
here.
by probe it?
By look in there, see if you can find a bullet. If you can find a bullet, you take that dirty, nasty finger that's been in somebody else with unwashed instruments. You're going to go in there, and if you can pull it out, then you do it. Then you ligate the wound, cauterize and ligate the wound. Okay? They had a thing called an Elaton's probe where it had a porcelain end, and you could stick it in, and if it tapped lead, which is a soft lead bullet, and then it come out and it's gray. Okay, fine, the bullet's here. Let's get a pair of forceps and see if we can pull the bullet out. They would do it that way. If they could save the limb, they would save the limb. All right. And then later on, if they could save the limb and do resection at the hospital later on, they would do that. And we're going to talk about that later also.
But they wouldn't go too. I mean, they wouldn't go too much time on one person, right? Because they got so many. So it'd be like, if we can't really find it after, what do you think, like 10, 20 minutes?
it off.
It's like, all right.
No, not really. No.
No, they would take their time. I mean, with as many as they had wounded.
Because lead is poisonous.
The only thing lead poisoning.
Yeah.
The only reason they would amputate a limb basically is because when you get hit with a soft conical lead bullet, it shatters the bone. And if you shatter the bone, there's no way you're going to resect that bone. Now, let's talk about the two different forms of amputation. Well, actually, three. The first one is what they call a guillotine amputation. I'll let you see it first.
Mm-hmm.
All right? And what they would do is they would just cut through the flesh, and they would
Did you
cut.
draw that, by the way?
No, that came from the medical and surgical. Help me out, Don.
The book what we were talking about.
Yeah, the
yesterday?
medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion
Yeah.
is what it caused, and we're going to get into what happened with that later and how it came about. So what happened is they would have they would cut through the flesh, and they would turn around and they would amputate it that way with a bone saw, and then that way they make it the bone high enough that you could put on a prosthesis.
So essentially, they cut out everything to the bone, then cut the bone.
And they cut higher up in the bone to be able to form a prosthesis.
Yeah.
All right. So with that, the second one is what they call a flap amputation, where you would cut it in the flap. And when you cut it in the flap like that, you're able to cut the bone up higher and then sew up the ends of it to turn around and be able to give a decent prosthesis.
What am I looking
And actually,
at
the
right now?
prostheses were pretty good back
That's
in
like an
those
arm.
days.
An arm?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, that's an arm.
Oh, okay.
You see, you're cutting the arm here, and then you're making your
And then
flap.
they
Here's
sew
your-
it together.
Torso. Oh.
Shit.
Sure, the audience like to see that. Here's if you got a joint joint cut, whenever you cut off hands, things like that, this would happen.
There's no anesthesia or anything.
No,
is
they
there?
had anesthesia.
chloroform.
Chloroform.
Yeah, they had chloroform and they had ether. And mostly you had your surgeon operating by candlelight at nighttime, and they operated so many times a lot of them went blind temporarily.
And they didn't know dosing, so a lot of times they'd wake up
Yeah, well, that's right, exactly. The problem was,
during the surgery.
during a surgery,
Yeah.
they didn't have a any kind of a knowledge of dosage. And I've read accounts where people have woken up in the middle of surgery, and it's like, well, you took off my arm, huh? Yeah. What do you want me to do? Well, go over there in the corner and have a little bit of opium and rest a little bit, And
They wouldn't just re-chloroform them?
no, they wouldn't, because they're trying to save it for the next guy. And again, they had readily available chloroform and ether, but then they had so many soldiers after a while that don't know if I can't say I've really read any accounts where they have woken up or not had anything to turn around and put them under. And then a guy Chisholm came around, and he invented a Chisholm inhaler where it goes up the nostrils, and you put a little bit of chloroform or ether in there, and that put them out, and that was effective too. With the very last we talked about that particular amputation of fingers and phalanges and
Oh, so they wouldn't cut the whole hand off.
no, if they could save the hand, depending on the wound, the guy just actually got a couple fingers probably blown off or damaged, and they cut the fingers off and cauterized it and ligated it.
Can I see
Now,
the
by
picture?
ligating,
Can I see the picture?
yeah, sure.
They were built different back then, people. They were really...
That looks like the
Really
old Napoleon thing, but
Yeah,
it's not.
they-
Well,
you know?
my whole
They actually
question is,
had a
why would you
penis
show
and
your
balls.
hand and not keep that maybe tucked into the pocket if you're going to take a picture of
Well,
yourself?
the idea was that they were documenting the wound. That's where these photos came
Oh.
from. They documented the wounds. Like, again, there's a medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion.
That's not going to work on Tinder today.
I don't think so. Yeah. So then all of a sudden you had your knee amputations where they would cut at, again,
Damn, man, this
At
is
the
so-
knee,
at the knee,
through the knee.
through the knee. They're cutting it off here because there's so much damage here. And that wound is going to give you, even though you don't cut it off here, you cut it off higher because you're going to administer a prosthesis.
Oh, yeah,
Right?
there you
And so that's one for you to take home and
No.
put on your bedroom.
go. No,
I'm sure your wife will like that.
no.
And then again, here's the shoulder disarticulation, where you cut off at the shoulder. Okay.
The shoulder ones, that's just...
I mean, I
Let
think
me
the
see.
shoulder and the knee is probably pretty
wild.
pretty
Right.
bad.
Now, a lot of times, like I told you, that if they could save the limb, they would save the limb. All right. And here's an example of a limb that they saved. This gentleman,
You think he's happier that he has it, or
well, I'm going to talk about that. You keep prompting me. You're doing good, Sean. I'm going to make you a commentator yet. With this particular one, what happened was this gentleman received a shoulder wound, and instead of cutting off the limb like we talked about before, you saved the limb. But the problem with this is that you had so much nerve and arterial damage of the thing that
They're
it
not
became a
feeling it.
useless appendage. You had the appendage, but it was a useless appendage, and as a result of that, they just said, you know what? It hurts too much. Go back and cut the damn thing off.
Yeah.
All right. And here is an example of a hip disarticulation where they are actually where they turned around and
so he's got no legs.
well, the one leg. He's got one leg. So they cut him off here at the hip because he had a wound that was very close to that, and there's no way of fitting a prosthesis on that, of course. So another problem we had with all those type of operations was gangrene. All right. So this is gangrenous. This is an example of a gangrenous arm, and they would put bromine on it. But the thing of it is, with gangrene and a lot of the problems with that is that if you wake up and you have maggots on your arm, your maggots are actually good for you because what they would do is they would turn around and they would eat the dead flesh, the gangrenous flesh, and they also secreted an ammonia type of secretion that kind of sterilized the area too. But imagine waking up and going, "Ugh," maggots,
I know. You're
Yeah.
like trying to get them off, and they're actually helping you.
Yeah, kind of like politicians,
Wow.
Except they're eating off your tit.
Yeah, really. This is a particular example of a guy who got shot.
In the face?
No, he didn't get shot in the face. It's
Neck?
an artillery shell. Artillery shell came and it ripped off his face.
So he
Okay.
did get shot in the face.
Hmm?
His jaw, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I've got examples of guys being shot in the face. But what happened was he got hit, and they rebuild.
Oh, there it is.
They rebuilt the floor of his mouth without anesthesia
Mm.
in the hospital. All right. This guy was a tough.
It's pretty profound that they had doctors back then at least trying to
Yeah, trying to do that. Yeah.
that
Right.
stuff.
This guy right here.
Wasn't that
This is the same
guy?
guy.
Yeah.
You see, now that's the original photograph. Let me hold it up here first. That's the original photograph
Right here.
Right here. That's what he looked like after they rebuilt his mouth. And then you see that they did another rebuild on his jawline and all that. And they turned around and he grew a beard and he hid his wound.
That's what I hide under here. I
That's
have
why
no-
you have that.
I don't have any.
Wait
Chain.
a second. So this is what
That's afterwards.
Oh, I thought it was this one.
No, first. This is the first one. That's after they sewed it up.
So what's that one?
That's the one as he eventually grew his beard, and then later on he turned around and grew even more of a beard.
He
you know.
almost look normal.
Kind of like Manny, he did it to hide the ugly,
No. I told my wife if I ever shave it off, I won't have any chin. I'm like this.
Yeah, really, really. So here's another one we're going to talk about also, and this is a guy H.K. Barnum, and Barnum was a
Like Barnum and Bailey's?
yeah, actually I think they're related.
Really?
Someone tried to tell me that was P.T. Barnum. I'm going, no, P.T. Barnum didn't serve in the war. He was a colonel, H.K. Barnum, and he received a wound, as you can see, through the hip. Okay? And they didn't expect him to live, but he did survive it. And he later on got promoted to general, and he fought in a couple other battles, including Gettysburg. And he got promoted to general by that time. So what happened with Barnum was that because he had that hip wound, that they turned around and they would take it when it got a little pussy, this and that, and they would agitate it with a wax string.
Right through, huh?
Right through. It was a through and through wound.
What is that they got in his body?
Wax or something.
Little wax, what, going through here?
Yeah.
It's a wax string that they put together.
What is a wax string?
Well, a string that was made that had wax coating on it.
And
They
what
would-
would that do?
They would use it to agitate the wound to be able to get some of the nasty stuff out of it.
Oh,
Okay. So here's the fun part about this. This is the actual hip. And I found this when I did a lot of the photographs at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which was in Silver Spring, Maryland. And they had a lot of the artifacts in there again, and I'm going to get into that later on, how that came about. And I'm actually, when we're shooting this, I'm holding the artifact. I'm going, it goes this way. No, it goes this way. No, it goes this way, And, it's kind of cool that, you have that.
And for you guys that are listening out there, not watching, maybe go watch the episode because there's a lot of visual aids out here.
That's the first time in your show you've had visual aids, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey.
Usually people can't, while they're listening, they don't have this
Right,
kind of
right,
stuff.
right.
Yeah.
Now, this particular individual was a New York soldier, a Union soldier, sticking together. And he was wounded in 3 different places. All right? I mean, these guys were tough. They were tough.
They were men.
They were manly men.
We don't have men anymore.
Doing manly things. Yes, I know. But if you look at it, you can see he's wounded in the abdomen. And usually with an abdominal wound.
What did you just say? Abdomen?
Yeah, the abdomen.
That's like fucking Stewie from Family Guy
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
cool whip, cool whip. Yeah, what'd you say? Whip?
I swear to God, I'm going to hurt you before the night's over.
Oh, Steve needs a drink.
Steve needs a drink.
It's too early.
It's 11:30. It's
Happy hour
lunchtime.
somewhere.
It's lunchtime.
Happy hour holidays? Yeah.
My watch says 5 o'clock. It's
yeah.
been stuck there for like a couple years.
So with an abdominal wound, what you do is if they'll turn around and they'll probe it, and if they can pull it out, they'll pull out the bullet. But they're afraid to go in and operate simply because if they struck a bowel or something like that, you're going to be spreading septicemia all over the body, that type of
Well,
thing.
I don't want to be spreading semen all over the body, bro.
You don't want to see that gut stuff all over.
Hey, Stephen, when we get right back, hold that thought real quick and we'll come back. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, and thank you for listening and watching Happy Hour Holidays. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Happy Hour Holidays. We were talking about a New York soldier who had a really nice beard. Not nicer than mine, but it's decent.
Actually, that looks way better than yours.
That's a different guy. Yeah.
His,
Okay.
his nipples look a little
All right.
a little weird.
Oh, yeah,
So,
they
well,
do.
that's a bullet wound, believe it or not.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
the
So
nip?
that was
Now, you
one?
see what happened? This is a guy named Edwin Bemis, and he was a New York soldier,
Uh-huh.
and he was wounded in 3 different battles. Now, you see he's got a abdominal wound. Don't make fun. And what
Oh,
happened
you
was
said
back
it
in the...
correctly now.
Well, thank you so much. Stewie. Anyhow, if you had an abdominal wound, they would try to pull the bullet out, but they didn't want to get in there because you could actually turn around and nick a bowel or something like that, and then you got a real problem. They knew about that, at least that portion of disease and nasty
Pretty much
germs and
shit
that
your
type
pants all day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, he received a wound on the arm, and he received a head wound. Now, what happened with the head wound was that they actually removed the bullet. They removed the bullet. Here, you can pass it around. And
Right there.
yeah, and you could.
How did he survive a head wound?
Well, that's just it.
Ricochet, maybe?
Well, it probably didn't have that much energy into it whenever they hit the wound when they hit the head. So what happened was that they removed the bullet from the head, and he had full mental faculties, and you could feel the pulsation of the brain. You could see the pulsation of the brain through the wound, and the heartbeat type of thing too.
That's
you know.
crazy.
And all these are documented in the book again, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Then afterwards, we're talking about towards the end of the war, we're dealing with prosthesis. All right. They actually had very good prosthetics back in those days. And this is a man named Columbus Rush. Columbus Rush was a Confederate soldier. And they had prostheses on both sides, of course. And you can see both of his legs were blown off by a cannonball.
But the prosthesis is on this side, right?
You know, these are the prostheses.
So those aren't his real legs.
No, those are prosthetic legs.
Yeah.
That's his real legs, what's left of them. Okay.
Did they bend?
Looks like they have the ability to bend there when he sits down, yeah. So Columbus Rush was a Confederate soldier, and he was wounded by a cannonball, and they fitted him with a good set of prosthetics, whatever you want to pronounce it. Don't make fun of the way I talk. And then you had some people who were really happy with the prosthetics they had, like this individual. So
This guy looks like a cyborg.
he made his own.
Oh, he made his own?
He made his own prosthesis.
Oh, wow.
And there you see it's functional, right? And
He looks like the guy from Wild Wild West.
Jim West.
Yeah.
No. You're talking about the evil dude?
Yeah, the
Yeah,
evil
Dr.
dude.
Lively.
Kind
No,
of
no, no.
ran off.
Yeah. So you see, the way that they got these wounds, and it's something I didn't talk about earlier, what I should have, was the type of ammunition that they used and the type of weapons they used, and also the type of tactics that they used. Back then, they still used Napoleonic tactics, moving in mass, straight line, going into cannon fire, musket fire, that type of thing. Now, in the North, you had rifled muskets, which makes your weapon accurate up to 1,200 yards. Okay,
Oh,
and so
1,200 yards?
that's crazy.
1,200 feet, maybe. I don't know. It's still too early for me, and I haven't had.
Talking
coffee
about a
yet.
mile, bro.
Yeah. 1,280 feet for a mile. So okay, 1,200 feet.
5280.
Okay, 1,280 feet for a mile.
No, it's 5280
5,280 feet in a mile.
in a mile.
Divided by 3 is like 17 something.
You know, you
1780.
gotta make me look like an idiot. You know, I thought I learned this in aviation school when I got my pilot's license.
Yeah,
Remind me not to get the
exactly.
plane with you.
1,580
Well, we're
feet.
not talking
Okay.
about nautical miles.
All right.
so.
Okay. We're talking about. Yeah. Thank you very much. Maybe I got too confused. I'm so confused.
No, that's-
So anyhow, what happened was that you had your rifled musket, which was accurate, but the Confederacy had most of their stuff imported from England, and they had smoothbore weapons. So it didn't fire very accurate. But if you've got a line of people coming at you in mass and you fire into that line, it's going to hit somebody.
Yeah.
The most deadly also was the artillery that they used.
the cannons, right?
Yeah. What they used, very good, Sean. What they used was, first of all, they had solid shot, which is like kind of like a shot put. I actually had somebody try to tell me they had a cannonball that they found at a flea market. And I looked at it and said, "See that, Mark? That's a shot put, you know, a 12-pound shot put."
Oh.
And they would fire the 12-pound solid out of a cannon, what they call a Napoleon cannon.
Mhm.
And then also with that type of smoothbore cannon, they had what they called canister, which was like a giant tomato can filled with iron balls like that.
So like
And
a
they would fire,
shotgun.
and they were making a giant shotgun out of the weapon.
Wow.
And that would vaporize people at
Man.
point blank range. That would tear them apart. And at Pickett's charge, they turned around and they double canistered. They took 2 canisters and put it in there and fired out and just literally blew these guys away. And it was very, very bad. They also had what they call K-shot. K-shot was a round cannonball, 12 pounds, and it was filled with powder and pieces of shrapnel. And whenever that exploded overhead, it would rain death upon everybody that's in its wake.
That's right, Steve. You heard it here. Steve Fantetti, a previous guest of ours, said they did not have exploding fucking cannonballs, and I told him they did.
They did.
Steve, you heard it here. I know you're listening. You were wrong. Yes.
So that's K-shot. It's
that-
called K-shot.
Is that new? Like, is this something new for
No.
the Civil War? Or is this
No.
something they've?
No,
They've had that shit a while
They've
since
had it
fucking
since the
Asia.
Revolutionary War.
Okay.
Yeah.
But since Asia had the same shit.
And then, I mean, what they did is the configuration of a shell, I didn't mean to hurt you. What they did in the configuration of the shell was that they would put a fuse, okay, a little conical shaped fuse about like that. Inside the cannonball, they would put it in what they call a sabot, which was a piece of wood that they would load it and push that fuse down towards where the powder charge was. And whenever they fired the weapon, they would put powder.
Inside the cannonball.
First of all, they would pack powder into the cannon.
Yeah.
Then they would turn around and take the projectile and pack it in there, and they'd ram it down. And then they would detonate the cannon, and when they detonated the cannon, the powder charge, what happened, that would also light the fuse.
Yep.
And mostly a 12-second fuse, and it would go overhead or hit the ground and go boom. And that's what detonated.
Yeah.
Exploding cannonball.
Yes.
Okay. And they also had different types of cannons that were rifled and made it much, much more accurate using different Hotchkiss cells and things like that. That also had the explosive opportunity to, ruin your day.
Yeah.
And so with those, that's what caused a lot of the damages and a lot of the wounds that happened during the war. But again, more soldiers died from disease in the Civil War than they did from battle.
How many soldiers did die during the Civil War?
600,000, 620,000.
Isn't it the
That's
most
both
deadliest
sides.
war ever?
In American history?
On American soil.
On American
Yeah.
soil. And that was the most. Gettysburg was 3 days. Antietam, which is in Sharpsburg, Maryland, outside of Hagerstown, had, I think, something like 22,000 casualties in 12 hours.
Damn.
And that was called the single bloodiest day in American history.
That was 1861.
That's 61.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
one of the first. That was like the first real.
Well, no.
No, not, I know
I
Fort
thought
Sumter was
Gettysburg
like the
was.
first.
well, Sumter was the very first.
And then-
The
but
first land
Antietam
battle
was the really.
The first land battle was Manassas.
Yeah,
And
that's
then
what I was
after
thinking of,
that, a year
Manassas.
later, you had a battle of a second Manassas, or like in the Union side, we would call it by the town on the Confederate side, or no, what was it? One way or the other. Yeah, one would call it by the river, because most of these battles took place during the rivers, transportation areas. Fredericksburg, you had the Fredericksburg River there, the Potomac, whatever, in Washington. And so on
Delaware
one side, we
River
call it
as
the
well,
Battle of
right?
Manassas, and some would call it the Battle of Bull Run,
Yeah.
that type of thing. And it's like we talked about the medical and surgical history of the War of the Rebellion. In the South here, me being a transplanted Yankee, of course,
Yep.
we called it the Civil War.
You really can't call Florida the South,
Yeah.
though.
Well,
I mean, because
Florida's a
everybody
whole
from
different-
all of the United States moves to Florida.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about during the war.
Were you born in Tampa?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I'm from Pennsylvania.
Were you born in Tampa?
No, Hartford.
I mean, that means 50% is not born. in
Well, I'm talking
Florida.
about during
I know.
1860.
I
Okay.
know. I'm just giving you a hard time, Steve. Somebody's got
You ever hear the term STFU?
shut the front up?
Yeah, that's the one.
Shut the fuck up.
So anyhow, in
Abdomen.
the North, they called it the Civil War. In the South, they called it the War of the Rebellion. Okay. And that's where you get that. For now, you had your first land battle was Manassas. Your second one, a year later, was on the exact same land. Then after that, you've had various battles. Like you've had Chancellorsville, and a year later, they're fighting on the same ground. They call it the Battle of the Wilderness. And during the Battle of Wilderness, it was so dry that they turned around and caught the woods on fire, and a lot of guys died from burning to death, smoke inhalation, that type of thing. And they were also, when they camped, they were camping on basically the grounds where most of their former comrades died, and they're waking up with a skull beside them or something like that. That's how gross it was too. It was not a good life.
Yeah.
There's nothing good about it.
We've talked about the atrocities of this war. What we haven't spoken about was why was this war? What were the precursor events to the start of this war?
Well, that is an argument that's still ongoing. And I've had this argument with several people. Everyone said, oh, it was about slavery, and it's about, no, actually, it was about several things. First of all, you talk about the industrial North versus the agricultural South, all right? And then tax gouging, that type of thing. And then you talk about, if we're going to turn around, and it was basically about states' rights. I live in Florida. I live in the South. I'm going to join the Confederacy because you're trying to encroach upon my political beliefs and my rights, just like we're finding today.
Yeah.
Yeah. With people saying, no, my state's got sanctuary cities and you federal guys can't come in here and do anything about it. Guess what? I'm bringing an army in and we're going to do something about it.
No.
And then, the slavery issue, at least in my opinion, is that if you're going to turn around and you're going to deal with taking away a country, you're going to mess with their economy. What's the best way of killing their economy? You take away their free labor. And then you have the
Free labor, slavery.
yeah, well, and Lincoln said that if I can free, all the slaves, I'll do them. If I have to keep all the slaves, I'll do them, whatever the case may be. And then, you've got, the ratification of the 13th Amendment and that type of thing too,
What was the ratification of the 13th Amendment?
freeing the slaves.
Yeah.
But what happened with during Civil War, everyone thinks, okay, I live down in the South, I'm free. No, you're only free to where the Union Army comes down and liberates your area. And when the Union Army liberates your area, then you're free. Then you've got a problem. What are we going to do with all these people that are freed? Well, they started following the Union Army and saying, what do we do now? They had no clue.
Weren't they promised property?
Well, that's afterwards. That's during the Reconstruction period. During the Reconstruction period, you had like Sherman and going into the South and his march to the sea in Savannah, in Atlanta. They said after the war, we're going to give you 40 acres and a mule to be able to farm the land that was part of the masters, and then a lot of that would come down to basically what later became Jim Crow laws and that type of thing, where they were discriminating against them, making it almost impossible to farm the land. And then after Lincoln was assassinated, Andrew Johnson became president. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat or Democrat. Anyhow, and what he did is he said, no more of this shit. He turned around and he revoked the 40 acres and a mule. And as a result of that, they thought, well, he was an alcoholic and he was do nothing president and we're going to control him and all that. And it turned out, no, he turned around and did just the opposite of what Lincoln did. And then he also turned around and he gave away a lot. I mean, he rebuilt the South by giving them railroads, building railroads, giving them all this extra money from the government to be able to rebuild the South and basically put everything back the way it was. And then you had all these organizations like the Klan that arose. And they were basically originally supposed to be, the reason they wore sheets was they were supposed to be the ghost of dead Confederate soldiers going back and turning around and resurrecting the way of life of the Old South prior to the war.
So are you telling me that the Klan was started by Democrats?
The Klan was what? The biggest grand wizard of the Klan was a guy named Nathan Bedford Forrest, who was a Confederate general. And he was the grand wizard of the Klan. And then what happened was it got too violent. Even he got out of it. He said, no, this shit ain't going to cut it. And he got out of the Klan. But it went on and on and on. I mean, even when I lived in Pennsylvania as a journalist back into the 1990s and 1980s, they had Klan rallies.
Still?
And I actually covered one because sweeps were coming up. And, sweeps.
Gotta get those ratings.
Yeah, got to hit the ratings. And we, I'm sorry?
Sweeps. It's when the networks get their
ratings.
big ratings.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sweeps
in other
week.
words, you put on your best
Sweeps
programming, that type
Yeah.
to keep them engaged and be able to get the ratings, the saying that, we're number one station in the area, that type of stuff, or the network, whatever the case may be. And we got a fax one time that said, KKK local Pennsylvania chapter is having a rally. And I'm going like, that's a good idea. Let's go cover that. That'll be a great one for sweeps, And my reporter was such a pussy. I mean, I tell you, well, I got to take my girlfriend to Boston to meet my parents. No, I'm going to cover the Klan rally, And I go there and I cover the Klan rally and I catch them on camera contradicting themselves left and right. We're not a hate group, but we hate Jews, the whole thing. And I'm going like, damn, are you kidding me? And the fun part of it is while I'm covering this whole thing is that a guy walks up to me and he goes, hey, Steve, how you doing? Hey, Jim, what are you doing here? I said, undercover state police. They're taking license plate numbers down. He said, you wouldn't believe how many cops, how many local sheriffs, how many other public servants are here at this rally because we're taking down, and they do this at every Klan rally and every hate group type of thing. They still do it today.
Write down everybody's who
License plate numbers, and we know who you are.
Have you heard now you being, because I remember you telling me you were a journalist.
Yeah.
What is your position on Catherine Levitz announcing that they are now going to start allowing podcasters, content creators, and social media influencers to have seats during the White House pressing meetings?
I think it's great.
It's an awesome
Yeah.
idea, right?
It is
I
great
worked
idea.
Right?
I worked two administrations in the White House.
Is this like what 400 chairs? I think is what it
No,
is.
I don't know how big it is.
I think it's
Actually, the
400.
press room's very thin.
Yeah.
And the reason it's
A
thin.
lot of people are standing up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, the reason it's thin is because that used to be FDR's swimming pool. And what happened was, like I said,
Is that real?
I worked
Yeah.
I worked as a photojournalist in the Reagan administration in his first term, and I worked there during Bush 43. And you go into it, and now they have robot cameras all over the place, and it's kind of neat too. But that FDR had what do you have?
Polio.
Polio. Thank you.
No.
I'm sorry, I had brain freeze. FDR had polio, and as a result of that,
It's talking about World War II Roosevelt.
yeah,
Yeah.
FDR,
Yeah.
not Teddy.
Yeah.
Teddy's my hero. what happened was that he had polio, and that's the way he could exercise his legs, and exercise the rest of his body. As he had a swimming pool built, which is now into the West Wing area. And
They're
after
going to
he
refill
died,
it with all the tears.
Uh-huh.
so they turned around and they filled it. They turned around and they made that the press room because they needed a place for the press to go to, as opposed to going into the Oval Office or whatever it was at that time. Because I'm not sure exactly what year the Oval Office was built.
Yeah, with the West Wing and all.
Yeah, I think it was after Harding or something.
Yeah, I think it was there.
So anyhow,
Pre-1900, right?
no, after 19
Oh.
Harding. So anyhow, what happened was that there's still a trap door, you can open up and go down to the bottom where the swimming pool was, and you can see this towel on that. And if you're a journalist and you're down there visiting, you can write your name on a Sharpie and the whole thing. And they got all the fiber optics running underneath it and everything like that.
Oh.
So yeah, it just proves that the White House press room is long and thin because it was FDR's swimming pool.
I think it's great that they're going to have fresh ideas
Really?
just out there.
They already said Matt Walsh. Do you know Matt
Yeah.
Walsh?
Oh,
is?
yeah,
And
yeah.
Benny Johnson.
Yeah.
They're already been contacted by the White House saying, hey, we're going to give you one of these new seats. And they also said that every single person that is currently in that press
Press pool.
pool, every single one's going to be reevaluated to see if they deserve to even show up.
Yeah. They're just
Which I like.
barking out orders from their corporate masters
Yes.
and
Right.
keeping the
And you saw what
narrative.
happened with Jim Acosta's, right?
Yeah. See ya.
Yeah. Now, do you think he was fired or did he quit? Because he said he quit, but they're saying he got fired.
I
See, nobody knows
six in
to
one
believe.
hand, half a dozen in the other.
Yeah, nobody knows what to believe when it
CNN's
comes to
dying.
the media.
Yeah,
It is.
And
It
if you
is.
look at these newscasts, you kind of notice
Especially
that.
the way Jake Tapper got just schooled, man.
Yeah.
Did you see that?
Anti-gun nut.
Yeah.
So anyhow, if you watch a lot of the networking news, you see that a lot of these different networks say the same thing.
Mhm.
That's because they had a network feed that tells them what.
Well,
to
remember
say.
the Conan O'Brien used to do a thing on his show where they would play all these local newscasts and it would be the same thing, and they
Yeah.
would just like bleed them over each other, and people would be laughing, but it's like this is propaganda. This is straight up
exactly
propaganda from the early 1900s, the Bernays
That,
and all.
that's deep state.
Yeah,
Who's running
they're
it?
they're programming you.
Mm-hmm.
Because none of those people.
Social engineering.
It's hypnosis.
But none of
It
those.
is
It's
hypnosis.
hypnosis. It
It's
is.
mass,
It is.
It's mass hypnosis.
Because
Yeah.
if you look
Mass
at
formation
if you
psychosis.
look at a network broadcast or any other kind of television broadcast or a radio, they have a deep voice,
Yep.
right?
They talk to you in a certain
And that's
cadence.
what happens. And when I do hypnosis and I turn around and I take somebody under, I talk in a deeper voice simply because the brain is more susceptible.
I'll
to
take
it.
off my pants.
And I don't want to see little Elvis. Thank you very much. Jeez, and I thought I used my personality for birth control, But anyhow, we got away from Civil War medicine here real quick. And what I wanted to talk about.
Well, actually, we got 3 minutes left. So.
Okay, to wrap that up, what I'm going to talk about in the 3 minutes is that after the war, Surgeon General Hammond decided that he wanted to collect some pathological specimens to better understand what happened and how we can improve medicine. And so he had a lot of them shipped to what was then the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. They were shipped in whiskey barrels, and they come back and they know some of the barrels were tapped. It's like different no shit situation,
That's Sean.
And then he collected.
Hey, no.
And he
that's not
collected
true.
these pathological specimens to better see and learn what we can do better to improve it. And it became the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and I think it's now called the Army Medical Center or something. It's still in Silver Spring, Maryland. And so they existed. And with all of that, he put together, where I got a lot of my material from, is he put together a volume of books called The Medical and Surgical History of the War of the Rebellion. So it talks about the different types of wounds they have. It illustrates the type of wounds they have. It turns around and shows the actual pathological specimens. Like I showed you, I handled that one hip, and I've had on the video. It shows like if you have a thoracic vertebrae with a bullet embedded in it, that type of thing. It shows how a soft lead bullet would turn around and shatter a bone, which required amputation, that type of stuff. And so that became basically the premises of all the medicine knowledge that we have to this day from that time period.
Oh, that's crazy. Don, do you have anything for final words on?
No, it's just fun to sit and talk history with everybody. provide a little insight of my little weird hobby of studying 19th century medicine. If you ever want to go down that rabbit hole, I'm more than willing to come back if you want to talk about that.
Yeah,
But yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. Is the bar open yet?
not for Sean though.
Not for Sean.
It's
though.
5 o'clock.
Yeah, it's 5 somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
And they call it happy hour holidays for nothing.
Yeah, that's
Don't-
right.
don't
Vodka
feed the
water.
horse drugs.
We're going on holiday. Woo! Yeah.
Well, really appreciate both of you guys coming on.
Thanks
you
for having
know,
me.
and definitely, I mean, we'll have Dom back on too. I mean, to talk
Yeah,
about that because
anytime.
we didn't really get to dive in there. You know, Steve talks a lot, and
Close your eyes.
We gotta learn to hypnotize Steve.
No, we always enjoy Steve, man. I love history, and that was a great
That's probably the
segment.
most
Yeah.
informative
Yeah,
one
formative,
we've
yeah.
had. Other
With-
than the
with
Next to the
Ebor.
Mafia one. Next to the Mafia.
The Mafia one was
Yeah,
good
yeah.
too.
I said other than the Ebor one.
All right, I'm going to do another shameless promotion. It's called, 25 seconds. It's called Ybor City Underworld, not underwear. Ybor City Underworld, a history. It's on Amazon Prime. I need the money. Dom is in it. He gets killed. Watch Dom get splattered all over the pavement. Thank you very much. And 9, 8, 7, 6.
Tune in to Happy Hour
Five,
Holidays. Like,
four,
comment, and subscribe.
three,
Thank you,
two,
everybody out there.
one. Bye.
Bye.